If you want to be successful in your exercise regime, consistency is the key. If you want to be successful in your diet, consistency is the key. If you want to successfully learn a skill, consistency is the key. If you want to effectively walk with God and be a blessing to others, consistency is a key. Now, why is it that we can struggle with consistency? Well, there's a myriad of reasons we struggle with consistency. Impatience. We want better results sooner. Discouragement, because we want better results sooner. So we get discouraged and we can give up. Forgetfulness. We just forget to go to the gym that day, or we forget to not eat that ice cream. Sometimes it's distractions in the world. Other things happen and take our focus away from what we should be doing. But there's a whole bunch of reasons why we struggle with consistency. But when it comes to our spiritual walk, when it comes to our walk with Jesus, if we struggle with being consistent in our walk with Jesus, we are going to struggle to grow, and we're going to struggle to be a blessing to others. So God wants us to walk consistently with Him, to be faithful in our walk with Him day in, day out, whatever the season might be. So in order to help us do that, in order for us to be inspired to be consistent in our Christian faith, can you turn in your Bibles, please, to Genesis chapter 40. Genesis chapter 40 and 41. We're going to look at the life of Joseph. We're in a series on the life of Joseph. And what we're going to see in chapters 40 and 41 is that Joseph was a believer who had a very consistent walk with his God, regardless of the circumstances that he found himself in. Now, chapter 40, from a structural perspective, hangs together by itself. But I've chosen to go and put chapters 40 and 41 together because I think together they also form a unit. Because in both chapters 40 and 41 you have two dreams. In both chapters it's going to be Joseph who interprets those two dreams. In both chapters those interpretations will be fulfilled. In both chapters you'll have the butler, the cupbearer. In the first chapter, he's going to forget Joseph. In the chapter 41, he's going to remember Joseph. And then in chapter 40, you're going to see that Joseph is faithful even though he's forgotten. And in chapter 41, you're going to see that Joseph is faithful even though he is successful. So I'll leave that up there for a while as we run through the text. It's quite a fair bit of text, so we'll skip through it reasonably quickly. Before we get to 4 characteristics of a consistent faith. 4 characteristics of a consistent faith. But let's go through the story. We'll pick it up in chapter 40, verse 1. Then it came about after these things. So after these things is where Joseph was accused by Potiphar's wife of sexual impropriety, and so thrown into prison. But in prison, he's blessed because God is with him, and he has all the responsibility in the world as far as the prison is concerned. So then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with his own interpretation. And when Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Then they said to him, "We've had a dream and there's no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, "Well, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, And on the vine were 3 branches, and as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house, for I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that should have put me into the dungeon." So that section where Joseph is making that request is at the center of chapter 40. The units are parallel around that, but that's central. He says to the cupbearer, "Remember me when you get to Pharaoh." So, positive outcome for the cupbearer. He's pretty happy about that interpretation. Verse 16. So the chief baker, he's pretty upbeat now. He's got a big smile on his face. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favourably, he said to Joseph, "I also had in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket, there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you." Bit of a downer. "Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them." And then a key verse of this chapter, verse 23, "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." So, that's a bit sad. Chapter 41, verse 1. "Now it happened at the end of 2 full years." So the cupbearer has forgotten Joseph for 2 years. He's languished for 2 years after successfully interpreting the cupbearer's dream. He's languished in prison for 2 more years. "It happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears thin and scorched by the east wind sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. And then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, just like the cupbearer and the baker. So he sent and he called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men, and Pharaoh told them in his dreams, and there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, "I would make mention today of my own offences. Pharaoh was furious with his servant, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and just as he interpreted to us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him." So Pharaoh calls for Joseph, and they bring Joseph to Pharaoh. Verse 15, "Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it, and I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And notice what Joseph says. Does Joseph say, "I'm the man, thanks Pharaoh"? No, he doesn't. Joseph then answered Pharaoh saying, "It is not in me, God will give Pharaoh a favourable answer." So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, "In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile," and he goes through his dream again and gives it again to Joseph. And verse 25, "Now Joseph said to Pharaoh," Pharaoh's dreams, the two dreams he has, are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come. And all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. And then after the interpretation is done, Joseph is bold enough to give Pharaoh some advice. Now this is a prisoner. He's just been brought up from the dungeon, and he's interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and in one sense he's preached to Pharaoh because he's mentioned God 3 times to Pharaoh's face, and of course Pharaoh thinks he's God, so that's interesting. And then after he finishes his interpretation, he gives him some advice, unrequested. Normally you don't tell the king what to do unless the king asks you to give you advice. Joseph just goes straight ahead and gives him some advice. So he says in verse 33, "Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him extract 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain for the food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt." And so this proposal, verse 37, seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. And Pharaoh says to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit?" So notice this is the same as Potiphar. Potiphar, when Joseph was serving in his household, recognized that God was with him. Even the captain of the guard in the prison recognizes that God is with him. Pharaoh now recognizes that God is with him. I mean, when God's people are faithful, I mean, he did interpret some dreams and do some supernatural stuff, but in terms of the Potiphar and the prison official, he was just being faithful as a believer. And when people are faithful as believers in their workplace and in their environment, other people who are not Christians will notice it. They will notice how it should be. Let your light so shine that people will see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16, that's what's happening here with Joseph. So Pharaoh says, "No one better than you, Joseph, to enact the plan that you've put around. So let's do it." So verse 41, "Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt.' Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put the gold necklace around his neck. And he had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, 'Bow the knee.' And he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission, no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt.' Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphenath-Paneath, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt." And verses 46 to 49 show that the interpretation of the dream comes true, and in the 7 good years, Joseph stores up a huge reserve of grain so that in the famine, Egypt is not only spared, but the rest of the world is spared. There's so much grain that's available. Verse 50, "Now before the year of the famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, 'God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household.' He named the second Ephraim, for he said, 'God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction.' And then when the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, Then there was a famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And so when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh, and the plan worked perfectly. So, there's a fair bit of text to get through, a bit of a story to get through, but I think that holds together because you see the two dreams. Joseph interprets both. The interpretations come true in chapter 40, and then likewise, two dreams. Joseph interprets the dreams in chapter 41 of Pharaoh, and the interpretation comes to fruition. And it's the cupbearer that joins the two chapters together. He forgets Joseph in chapter 40, he remembers Joseph in chapter 41. Okay? When you get to the end of this chapter, it's interesting, and particularly that last part of the chapter, a commentator named John Sailhammer brings this out, that Joseph seems to be compared to Adam. Joseph is like a new Adam in a sense. So have a look at this. Adam failed the test of good and evil, whereas Joseph discerned between good and evil. And where he gets that from is the dream of Pharaoh with the cows, because the good cows, it's the Hebrew word tov. Tov is the word for good in Hebrew, and it's the same word that's used in Genesis chapter 2, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the ugly cows, well, the word ugly in Hebrew is the same as the word for evil, ra. And so the ugly cows are referred to as evil cows, ugly or evil cows. And so Sailhammer reckons there's a connection there between the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that Adam fails with that test, whereas Joseph is able to discern rightly between good and evil. But whether you accept that one or not, these next three I think are legitimate. Adam was made God's vice-regent to rule over the earth, to rule over the Garden of Eden and to rule over the earth. That was it. He said, manage this for us. Pharaoh made Joseph vice-regent over all of Egypt. Man was made in God's image, so Adam was made in God's image. Notice here that Pharaoh took off his signet ring and gave it to Joseph and gave him a staff. So that signet ring bore the image of Pharaoh, so it meant whoever was wearing that ring had the authority of Pharaoh. So it's the same deal. He's given Pharaoh's image to be able to enact Pharaoh's program. God gave Adam a wife, Pharaoh gives Joseph a wife. So you've got all these parallels. And then Sailhammer brings out this. He says this is the point of the parallel. He says Joseph seems to be represented as an ideal of what a truly wise and faithful man is like. He is the model of the ideal man or the ideal king. He accomplishes what Adam failed to do. He's a reflection of what might have been if Adam had been faithful, and an anticipation of what might yet still be, or as what we would say, well, what will be in terms of the Lord Jesus Christ. Someone who is faithful to govern well. So, with that in mind, so we see that Joseph is faithful because in chapter 40 he's in prison, and he's in prison for a long period of time, 2 years after the cupbearer forgot him, but he was in prison for years before that as well. But he's still faithful to God. And we see in chapter 41, because we know he's faithful to God, because at the start of chapter 41, while he's still a prisoner, he's faithful to God in his speech to Pharaoh. After his success, we see he's faithful to God because he has 2 children and he gives them Hebrew names, even though he's married an Egyptian wife. He gives them Hebrew names, and those Hebrew names reflect his faith and his gratitude to God. So he's faithful in adversity and he's faithful in prosperity. So let's look at 4 characteristics of believing faith that come out of these 2 chapters that hopefully will inspire us to do likewise. Number 1, faith endures in adversity. Faith endures in adversity. Here's the deal in chapter 40. You've got Joseph sitting in prison, forgotten for 2 years, and he's powerless. So Joseph has every reason to be discouraged. He's got every reason to be bitter. Every reason to stop serving, to stop being faithful, every reason to lose hope. I mean, here was the perfect opportunity, God. I mean, this was God-given opportunity. The cupbearer comes down. I interpret the guy's dream. He goes back to Pharaoh. I'm able to give him a message. Surely God's going to work right now. Woohoo, this is great. And then Nada. Oh, I thought this was how it was going to work out. Didn't work out that way. And so in that moment, you can imagine in the years following, Joseph could easily have gone, wow, I put all my eggs in the basket of God and he let me down. So if he's going to let me down, I'm going to let him down and I'll do my own thing. Enough of this serving stuff. Easily could have grown bitter. Easily could have forgot God. Easily could have given up on serving. But he didn't. He stayed true to his faith. He was faithful. He still had a God awareness. And we know this because of chapter 41 when he comes before Pharaoh and Pharaoh says, I've heard that you can interpret dreams. And he says, nope. God gives me the interpretation. God's the one who interprets the dream. I'm just the conduit. But he has this God awareness and he's got this willingness to serve and he's still faithful. What a wonderful example of someone in adversity still serving God, even though he's got reasons we would think not to serve God. It kind of touches on the broader theme of suffering. We're in an age for it where somehow we tend to think that we ought not to suffer or we've got to try and minimize our suffering. Suffering is bad. That's just not true. We are going to suffer in this world because we're in a fallen world. And I heard it said by someone just recently that, the very first moment you came into this world caused two people immense suffering. Your mother, it was a very painful act to have that child. And when the child comes out, what's the first thing that comes out of its mouth? It's crying. And if it's not crying, the doctor makes it cry, right? Why is it crying? Because it was nice and safe. And all of a sudden it's out in the big bad world. It's suffering. So suffering marks the beginning of our life in this fallen world. And we're never going to be able to escape it. Bad things are going to happen because we're in a fallen world and we have a fallen nature. We're going to do bad stuff and suffer for it. Other people might do bad stuff to us and we're going to suffer for it. I mean, we don't want to deliberately cause our suffering to ourselves or anybody else. But the truth is that we're in a world where we are going to suffer. And we're not necessarily going to be able to make sense of that suffering. Sometimes we're going to suffer for long periods of time and not know why. That's just the nature of life. And God calls upon us, like Joseph, to be faithful, even in the midst of that adversity. Because we don't know the end. But God does. He's got a reason. And in fact, the Bible tells us that the general reason for our suffering is to prune us and to hone us so that we become more and more like Christ. Take off the rough edges. James chapter 1 verse 12 says, "Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial." And blessed means happiness, sort of joyfulness. How blessed, how happy, how joyful is the person who perseveres under trial, who keeps going even though there's suffering. There's a blessedness to that person. And let me tell you, there's a tremendous witness to that person. So we've got half a dozen or more folk in the congregation who are significantly ill or in significant pain. But the way that they respond to their illness or their pain is such a tremendous witness to all those who are around them. Even though there's no necessary sudden or soon relief from that pain, they still soldier on. They still persevere with the Lord. And that's tremendous. That's exactly how it should be. It's better to be faithful in chains than faithless on a throne. It's attributed to Athanasius from the 4th century. So that's number one. Faith endures in adversity. Number two, faith is courageous in opportunity. So this is, I love this part. This is the same as Daniel chapter 3, in a sense. But here's the danger. The pharaohs claim to be divine, or certainly divinity was ascribed to the pharaohs, both living and dead. And the pharaohs believed that they were the mediators between man and the gods. They believed in a whole bunch of gods, and they were the mediators. And when Pharaoh comes to Joseph and he says, "I have a dream, no one can interpret it, but I've heard it said that you can interpret it," Joseph responds, the first thing out of his mouth is, "It's not me, God." The one true God, he's the one who gives the interpretation. And so he goes on to mention God a number of times as he speaks this first sentence these first words to Pharaoh, which is tremendously courageous. Though Joseph probably doesn't even think of it as courageous. He's just living out his faith. He's just being true to what he knows to be true. So he's not deliberately goading Pharaoh. He doesn't come out and say, hey, you think you're God? You're not God. I know the true God, and he's given me the interpretation. He doesn't do any of that. He's just living out his faith, and he's speaking the truth as he knows it to be. Little does he know that really Pharaoh had every right to be offended by what he said, because he's implying that Pharaoh's not God because Pharaoh can't understand his dream. Hey, Pharaoh, if you're supposedly a god or you have connections with the gods, how come you don't understand your dream? Not much of a god, are you? No. That's the implication. But Pharaoh, to his credit, is humble enough not to be arrogant, and he accepts the witness, as it were, from Joseph. So Joseph is courageous, and this is what faith does, and it's a natural courage. It's not a beat-up courage. It just flows out of his life, and that's the kind of faith that we want to cultivate for ourselves and for one another. Is the kind of faith that when an opportunity arises, we just naturally speak of God. We just naturally speak of our faith. That's what we want, and that's natural courage that comes from a consistent faith. So this is Benno Jacob quotes. He says, "This speech is as pious as it is frank. He who is aware of God is humble and fearless at the same time. Even a king is nothing compared to God." So if we understand who our God is, if we understand who the Lord Jesus is, if we understand the power and the person of the Holy Spirit who's at work in us and in the world, we ought not fear anybody. I don't mean that in an arrogant sense. I just mean that in terms of being intimidated. We ought not to fear anybody. Anybody we come across, whether they be celebrities or politicians or athletes or neighbours or adversaries, anybody, they're all broken, sinful people who one day have to give an account to God, just like me. And there's no need, therefore, for me to be intimidated by them. So courage to take opportunities when they arise. Joseph had that courage to take the opportunity that was right before him. Thirdly, faith not only endures in adversity, faith endures in prosperity. And sometimes this is a greater trial and temptation than adversity, a greater difficulty for faith than adversity. Why? Well, when prosperity comes your way, it's very easy to forget God. It's very easy to attribute your prosperity to yourself. So here's the situation now. So after Pharaoh says, "Oh, you are the man, you be my prime minister. I give you all authority in Egypt, you are second to me." Well, he's in the palace now. He is exalted. He is the top dog in Egypt, bar one. And he has all the power in the world. Particularly when the famine starts to break, because then he's going to have foreign dignitaries coming to him asking for bread. And he has the power to withhold that. So immensely powerful. So here's the temptation for Joseph. He can claim glory for himself. Man, did you see my interpretations? How good were they? Hey? Woo-hoo. I deserve this. Yeah, it's about time. I mean, I've served my time in the dungeon, and I deserve this. And boy, now I'm in a position, I'm going to get even. I'm going to get even with all those dirty, rotten scoundrels who put me in that dungeon. He had the means to do that. He could exact revenge if he wanted to. He could claim glory for himself. He certainly could forget God. Because now he's got everything he wants, right? He's got all the material needs that he wants. He doesn't need to rely on God for anything, supposedly. That's the danger. That's the temptation. By the way, that's pretty much where we're at in our culture at the moment. Where, from a cultural perspective, there has never been a wealthier, more comfortable generation than ours. on the face of the earth in the history of the world. It's quite unprecedented. The wealth that we have is unprecedented. So we're on this slide more than we are perhaps in the previous slide with adversity. And so these temptations are very real to us, because with all of our wealth and with all of our prosperity, very easy for us to forget God, very easy for us to claim glory for ourselves, very easy for us to exploit the opportunities we have to move away from God. But what was Joseph's response? He was faithful, he was God-aware, and he was serving. And if you notice, as the story goes on, you'll see this more and more, but even at the end of chapter 41, he takes a tithe of the grain in the good years so that they'll have enough stored up in the bad years to be able to feed everybody. It's an act of service by Joseph. That's a great idea that he had, and he enacted that well. He executed the plan, and by doing that, he's saving the world, in a sense, through famine. He's serving the world. Where did he learn how to serve like that? Well, in the dungeon, in Potiphar's house. That's where he learned to serve like that. He's been serving his whole life. He's been serving in the small things, and he's been serving so well that everybody noticed it. So now he's got great responsibility. He just naturally brings those same skills and abilities and attitudes to the big tasks, and he executes really well. He has a God awareness because, again, when he has these two children, he gives them Hebrew names, and he remembers God's goodness. God made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Ephraim. He knows that it's God who's done this for him, and he rejoices in God. So he's God aware in his prosperity, and he's using the power that he has for good. He's wielding the power that he has for good. And that's what in the pastoral prayer, when we're praying for people in the halls of Parliament to come to faith or to exercise their faith, that's what we want them to do, to bring their faith to bear in places that have great influence over the culture and over the world. And that's what we want to do, is bring our faith to bear in that sphere that we're in the world. Whatever it might be, teaching or in the medical field or whatever profession we might be in or field we might be in, to bring our faith to bear in that field. Paul warned Timothy, he said, those who are rich, this is what he said, give the rich people, which would include all of us here today. Okay? We're all rich by the standards of this text. All those who are rich are not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God. He said, Timothy, when you're pastoring that church in Ephesus, you make sure you tell the rich people there not to trust in their riches and not to boast in their riches, but in fact to use their riches for the cause of the gospel and to boast in God. And Augustine apparently said, prosperity is a greater test than adversity because it hides the danger. It hides the need. We don't quite see the need as greatly in prosperity as we do in adversity. When we're in the pit, we understand we're in a pit. We need to get out of the pit. It's very obvious what the need is. We're broken. Help. But when we're in prosperity, the need's not quite as obvious. So that's the danger. So consistent faith endures in adversity. It is courageous in opportunity. It endures in prosperity. It marvels at God's sovereignty. It marvels at God's sovereignty. So throughout these two chapters, in fact throughout Joseph's life, God's sovereignty is front and center, even though it's happening through providence. So providence is how God works in the world. And my view of God's sovereignty is that God has an end in mind and he's moving us towards that end, but in such a way that he doesn't overrule human freedom. So I don't believe in divine exhaustive determinism, which is a theological term which means that God makes every decision for everybody all the time. But I believe that God is sovereign in that he knows what the end is, and he's moving this world to its end, and he will get it to the end, but in such a way that doesn't override individual freedom, which to me makes God a much greater God and his sovereignty much more wonderful and amazing. Because how can you move things to their appointed end when you've got so many creatures with different free wills? I don't know, I can't do that. I can't imagine anybody who can do that. You would need to be infinitely powerful and wise and amazing to do that. And that's my God. So, events in the stories that indicate God's sovereign control. Well, Joseph is sold, he's not slain. So, any one of these things don't happen, then the world is not saved through famine. So, Joseph is sold, not slain. Remember the brothers wanted to kill him in chapter 37? They wanted to kill him. But Reuben and then Judah come along and say, no, let's not kill him, let's just sell him into slavery. So, that would be divine providence. Joseph is sold into slavery as an officer of Pharaoh, to an officer of Pharaoh. So he could have been a slave in the field. He could have been anywhere in Egypt, but he goes to the capital and he's put in the household of one of Pharaoh's officers. That's providential. He's imprisoned, he's not killed by Potiphar. When Potiphar hears that his wife claims that he's sought to molest her, he gets very angry, we're told in the text, and he had every right to kill Joseph because he's a slave. He's a Hebrew slave. Who cares? You don't treat my wife like that. Off with your head. But he's not killed. Why not? I think it's divine providence. He's treated well by the prison warden, which means that he's in control of other prisoners when they come. If that doesn't happen, he doesn't get to meet the two guys who come down there, the cupbearer and the baker. Those two servants come down. So that's providence that those two men come down at the same time, sent by Pharaoh, and they're directly employed by Pharaoh. Divine providence that the butler forgets Joseph. See, what would have happened if the butler didn't forget Joseph? What would have happened if the butler goes back to the Pharaoh and says, oh, Pharaoh, this Hebrew kid, he had this dream. I had this dream, he interpreted it, and he said that he's been unjustly imprisoned. You've got to let him go. And Pharaoh says, sure, I'll let him go. And Pharaoh's out of there. 2 years before Pharaoh has his dreams. No interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams by Joseph. He doesn't become prime minister. So the delay is an act of providence. Now, this is a hard one for us to swallow, because when we're in the pit, when there's adversity, when there's a trial, and we're not getting relief, and it's not working out the way we want it to work out or the way we think God should work it out for us, it's so tempting for us to think, God's forgotten us. But the truth is he hasn't. Not his timing yet. He's at work in this world, providentially, moving things to their appointed end, and he wants you just to wait faithfully on him and allow your character to be shaped and to be honed and to be humbled in that adversity while you wait. And there's no guarantee as to when that end will come. That's the attitude that he wants from us. This attitude that says, it doesn't matter, Lord, whether I'm in adversity or whether I'm in abundance, I'm going to be faithful. In fact, that's Philippians 4:13. I think I've mentioned this to you before. A verse often misquoted. For I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can jump over buildings because Christ strengthens me. No, in the context, Paul is saying whether I have a lot or whether I have nothing, whether I'm in adversity or prosperity, I can do all things because Christ strengthens me. I can handle it. I can handle adversity and I can handle prosperity because Christ strengthens me. And that's the attitude that God wants from us. So God's sovereignty is seen through the butler forgetting Joseph, but also through the butler remembering Joseph after 2 years. Joseph comes up to Pharaoh, Pharaoh makes him prime minister, and it all happens. So connect all those dots and you can see God's sovereign hand, God's providence at work powerfully in Joseph's life. And you sit back and you marvel. And then we know, well, God's doing that all the time for all of us throughout all of history. And it's comforting because we know that our Father, who loves us more than anybody else, has things in hand. And what he calls on us to do is to be faithful. One other point with respect to God's sovereignty here, there is a cultural dynamic happening in this passage, just like there is in Daniel. In two places where the Hebrews find themselves in other countries who serve other gods, you have Joseph and Daniel, the only two characters in the Old Testament who interpret dreams. In the story of Joseph, Pharaoh's professional magicians cannot interpret his dreams. In Daniel, chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's professional magicians cannot interpret his dream. But in both cases, amateurs, youths. Joseph, who's a youth, interprets the dreams thanks to his God, and Daniel, who's a youth, interprets the dream thanks to his God. So the point, Israel's God is much greater than the gods of the pagans. Same is true of Moses in Exodus chapter 8. But there's this one-upmanship, if you like, because Pharaoh thinks he's a god and has all these magicians who supposedly are in touch with the gods, but they can't figure things out. But a youth, a little kid from a Hebrew, he can do it. And likewise with Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar has all of his professional soothsayers and magicians who supposedly can understand all the mysteries of the world, can't figure it out. But this kid, this Hebrew, he can, thanks to God. So, a consistent faith endures adversity, has courage in opportunity, endures prosperity, and marvels at God's sovereignty. So our big idea for this morning, for better or for worse, stick with our sovereign God and you will be a blessing. I did change it. Initially I had, and you will be blessed. And I thought about it. I said, no, you'll be a blessing. Not just about us. Not just about me. For better or for worse, stick with our sovereign God and you will be a blessing. And by you being a blessing, you will be blessed. That just goes with the territory. Set your eyes off yourself all the time and you'll actually be blessed as you think of others and as you engage for others. Well, thank you for being with us this morning.